As Putin and Trump conclude their meeting in Alaska, and Washington's 50% tariff deadline on India looms, studios shout, "New crisis!" But New Delhi knows this playbook well. Let's go back in time and open an old forgotten file forged way back in 1953. Article 6 of the first Indo-Soviet Trade Pact reads, in plain typewriter font, all payments may be made in Indian rupees. Beside the tea and cotton sits crude petroleum, 40 years before anyone coined the phrase de-dollarization. 2 decades later, this clause helped keep India's lights on. New Delhi, October 1973. Petrol queues curl around Connaught Place. Streets dim early to save power. The Arab-Israeli war and the oil embargo turned crude from a $3 commodity into a $12 shock. India's petroleum import bill leaped from a few $100 million to well over $1 billion across 1973 and 75. Facing a balance of payments crisis, Indira Gandhi's government rummages through its diplomatic toolkit and rediscovers this 20-year-old mechanism, settled with Moscow in rupees. The logic is simple. India conserves scarce hard currency, while the USSR spends its rupee earnings on Indian goods. Through the 1960s, though, oil never moved in serious volumes. Soviet barrels mostly flowed where the pipes pointed, that's into Europe. India was set up for Gulf crude, short sea routes, familiar blends. And that's why the rupee clearing promise just sat there on paper for over 20 years. Only when 1973 blew oil prices sky high did Delhi and Moscow open the old book and turn the words into real tankers. Indira Gandhi's finance ministry sends an SOS to Moscow. The Kremlin responded, agreeing to ship West Siberian crude to India in exchange for pig iron, steel, and tea. No dollars needed, just two soft currencies locked together. One Soviet tanker after another noses into Bombay Harbour, and Indo-Soviet trade leaps. For a decade, the rupee-ruble artery kept Indian refineries humming, even when Tehran erupted in 1979 and oil prices spiked again. 2 deaths, 2 ledgers, and 1 fixed rate. The RBI on one side, the Soviet Trade Bank on the other, and both agreed that 10 rupees was equal to 1 ruble for every invoice. How did it work? Say a Soviet tanker docked in Bombay with oil worth 50 million ruble. 500 million rupee would be immediately added to the USSR rupee account. Moscow was now free to spend those rupees on Indian goods and services. The aim? To keep the ledger roughly balanced. What went wrong then? By the early 1990s, the 1:10 peg was not in sync with reality anymore. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Shops in Russia could now set real prices and were not forced to fix their price. During the fixed price era, people ended up with a lot of savings because they simply couldn't spend their money. Shops ran out of supplies, and now removing the fixed price structure led people to spend a lot more, and with it came massive inflation, almost 2,500% in cases. In 1992, after Russia unified its exchange rates, the official rate was pegged at around 125 ruble to a US dollar. This rose to 2,000 ruble to the dollar by mid-1994. On the other side, India was facing its own problems. By the end of December 1990, India's foreign exchange stock could cover just about 3 weeks of imports. The RBI's own benchmark of import cover had collapsed. The Gulf crisis hit, oil prices spiked, and petroleum import bills more than doubled. Indian workers were airlifted home from Kuwait, and remittances dipped. UN sanctions killed exports to Iraq and Kuwait, and short-term credit from abroad got pricier, more expensive, scarcer. Non-resident Indian deposits also flowed out. With a foreign exchange crisis looming, Delhi dialed the International Monetary Fund and accepted an 18-month standby agreement on 31st October 1991. The relief money came with 3 headline clauses: float or at least half float the rupee, shrink the fiscal deficit, and the clause to put an end to it all. Eliminate bilateral clearing arrangements inconsistent with a multilateral system of payments. No one had to name the arrangement being talked about here. The rupee-ruble book shut itself. Delhi, honor-bound to its IMF letter and mindful of every outflow, turned to the Gulf. Saudi and Kuwaiti tankers sailed 6 days, offered 90-day credit periods, and carried back the currency the IMF had filled the Indian coffers with. By 1994, Russian barrels were just a statistical asterisk, a mere 0.4% of India's crude diet. Boris Yeltsin arrived in New Delhi in January 1993. The books were finalized, and every future cargo, steel, tea, or oil, would be priced in convertible currency. The rupee-ruble artery, once a lifeline, had rusted into a museum piece. For nearly 3 decades, Middle Eastern supply lines, the dollar credit and US refinery technology had become part of India's story. All seemed settled until an old war front stirred again. The Russia-Ukraine war broke out, and when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, the G7 put a $60 price cap on seaborne Russian crude. Urals, Russia's main export crude, sold at heavily discounted prices, often $20 or $30 below Brent. By mid-2025, Indian refiners were buying 1.8 million barrels a day, about a third of national demand, while staying well within the G7 $60 cap. Fast forward to 2025, just past midnight on 6th August, Donald Trump posted this on his Truth Social account. But this time the books look different. India sits on about $688.9 billion in foreign reserves. UPI, India's instant bank-to-bank payment rail, moves nearly 19.5 billion instant payments a month. And rupee settlement accounts now link Indian banks with partners in 22 countries. The Ministry of External Affairs reminded reporters that India was being unfairly singled out. Europe had imported 16.5 million tons of Russian LNG the previous year alone, and that US utilities still use Russian uranium. Analysts estimate that replacing discounted Russian crude would add $9 to $11 billion to the annual import. Time is a flat circle. In 1953, two soft currencies shook hands to dodge the dollar. In 1977, that handshake lit India's lamps in an oil crisis. 1991, the same handshake, out of tune with market reality, dissolved under IMF Inc. 2022, discounts lured Russian tankers back to India. 2025, a tariff gunboat arrives, but India now steers with bigger reserves, faster payment rails, and more partners than ever before. History doesn't repeat, it reprises. The slogan may be de-dollarization, yet the underlying motive remains unchanged since Connaught Place went dark at 10 p.m. on October 1973. Buy the barrels that keep 1.4 billion lives moving at the lowest strategic cost, whatever flag, currency, or tweet tries to say otherwise. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Here's us telling you that we are back. Please do subscribe, and a lot more interesting videos and stories coming your way. Thanks.